Hi, I'm Ella Feingold. I am an orchestrator. Hope you're doing really well. This is going to be part 3, I believe, of From MIDI to the Orchestra. Excuse me. I wanted to break down a few pages of a cue that I orchestrated for the film Boxing Day that just came out. And so why don't we start by just having a listen to the beginning of the cue and following along with the finished orchestration. Okay, it's a nice cue. This is just the first half. We would never make it through the whole cue. This video would be like an hour long. So let's have a look at the first page and see what was delivered and what I did. So we've got a string pad that starts at bar 1 and it goes to bar 9. And we've got a flute and what do we got here? I can't even see. A bassoon. God, I'm getting old. With my geezer goggles. So we've got some decisions to make. So this is the last cue of the movie. They're outside and he is proposing and he's on one knee. And so there is uncertainty, and I wanted to bring out some of that uncertainty and anticipation in the orchestration. It's already in the music, I think, just by the fact that nothing's moving and it's just holding through. And there's a little bit of, obviously, melody and whatnot, but I think it was composed in a way that we're sort of anticipating. So what I chose to do is we have 5-part harmony, and then we go to 3 parts, and then by bar 6 it's 1 note. Okay. So what I ended up doing here in the strings was to sort of exploit the uncertainty. I used natural bass harmonics. These notes are available as natural harmonics from these pitches. So I'm sort of exploiting that by using harmonics, and I've cued them because I'm not 100% sure that the composer will like this. He happened to love it, which is great, but that's why we cue things again. And in the upper strings, I used double stops, and I did not divide the firsts because I really wanted the top note to be prominent. Always make sure that, people can hear the top note of the chord, especially when you're doing, film and video game orchestration. And so the reason I chose to use double stops here, which we typically don't do at pianissimo, if I had to be formulaic, I would say typically double stops when you want force, and double and triple, or multiple stops rather. And I use double stops a lot when it's a sort of frenzied tremolo texture and it's, easy to grab a 6th or something. But in this case, I did it like, with the G and the D here, which are, just 2 open strings on the violin, the bottom 2 strings, is that you're not getting vibrato because the strings are wide open. And so I thought having a, no vibrato to the sound or very little Of course, there's a little, poco fib here. They pretty much, there's a little bit of vibrato when there's a pad. But anyways, I just wanted to exploit a little bit more of the non-vibrato-ness of it without, having too much emotion, if that makes any sense. And so that is the strings. So we've got a flute here, sort of holding for, I guess, 7.5-ish bars or whatever. And the tempo is 70 BPM, and I know that this is, not optimal to take in one breath, let alone possible. But so I'm breaking this up between two flutes by writing in an 1/8 note breath here. So that's one thing that I'm doing. And I also just happen to like the sound of two flutes in unison. It's just, or I should say many flutes in unison. It's something that I got from Klaus Ogerman and Henry Mancini, who would write like 4 and 5 alto flutes or bass flutes in unison, and it's just such a beautiful sound. So the last thing I did here was there's a bassoon, and it's perfectly fine, and it's certainly tender, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with keeping it in the bassoon. I chose to put it in a horn with a fiber mute because I just wanted it to be a little bit more mysterious, blend a little bit better from the flute with the flutes. And I wanted the flutes and the horn to, and the strings to sort of all be in one sonority. I'm not trying to have things be too colorful here. I want things a little bit more gray or monotone or whatever. And I did not put in any breaths because it's sort of just a touch here and then they get out. The last thing I'll point out here, which is just a very small detail that I chose to do, which is here we've got a dotted quarter note, and that's fine. What I chose to do is be very literal here and take the dotted quarter note and tie it to an 1/8 note to be very explicit or implicit. I always mix those two up. Where to get off of the note, because that can be very important and something to be very mindful of is, having clean offs for the conductors and players. And it's not just about where we start, but how do we get off something and or out of something. So that's the first couple of pages, and moving right along, bar 10. So it doesn't look like there's a lot happening in the music, but if you look deeply, you'll see that there are things in here that are hidden that suggested things to me. Excuse me. So this was delivered in the cello. I thought the cello and the harp together, that the cello would just be a little too powerful, and I just wanted something that fit a little bit better with the harp. And I put it into the violas. I just thought it would be, I don't want to say transparent, but just blend better. What I chose to do to sort of refine that a little bit was I added one desk of cello with the violas. And why did I do that? It's the first desk, and it's just a way of just slightly coloring the violas without overwhelming the sound. It's something I got from Eugene Ormandy, and he does this a lot with the strings, where he might have a couple of desks play with the string section above them. So in other words, a couple of desks of cello coloring violi, a couple of desks of violi coloring seconds. So that's just something I got from Eugene Ormandy. And I can talk about that in another video, sort of how he creates the Philadelphia sound. So, quite literal here. I phrased this. I put a tenuto marking because I wanted a slight push here. And I did a bracketed crescendo, which can sort of mean two things. It can mean that the crescendo, that it's reset each time it happens. It's sort of reset to the prevailing dynamic, but it also can mean sort of like a poco crescendo, just a very subtle crescendo. I used my imagination because it's outside and it's windy, so I did this breath noise thing again that worked out really well. And lastly, I took a couple of basses and I did the sort of Ravelian sonorous fluid and just sort of bathed the sound in this, pedal. Excuse me, it's something I look to do when it's appropriate with the music. So now I think what's the most interesting part here is if you look at this harp part, I think a lot of orchestrators might simply just put a slur over it and pedaling and move on, but there's actually something else happening here. There's sort of a hidden melody, and I'm going to play this for you and see if you hear it yourself. So I think that's pretty obviously, there's a melody in there and there's an accompaniment. I can't really tell you how I got comfortable with seeing and hearing these things. I can tell you from studying Ravel's orchestrations or his piano transcriptions. And if you don't know this, I guess I should explain the way that I learned orchestration, believe it or not, which is pretty stupid, but I'm glad I did it, was I took Ravel's piano music that he had not orchestrated and I orchestrated it myself. And so I just learned to just see all of these things buried in the hands with the crossing and all the multiple voices, and it's just something I got very familiar with. So what I ended up doing was sort of extracting this melody in one harp because we had two available. And this is Christmas music, so I don't mind sort of over-gilding the lily. And so I put a vibraphone with the harp. Fans are off, soft mallets to not really hear any attack. And as a way of just coloring the harp. So I thought that was a nice color, especially for Christmas music. And then the second harp is sort of getting touches of what was in the original harp. And I'm using harmonics here that sound in unison with these pitches. It's just more resonance. So together it sounds like this with all three. Cool. So let's move on. So this page, we've got something happening in the flute, we've got something happening in the bassoon, we've got some high notes here on the piano, we have a continuation of what was happening in the harp, and now the violins, sort of have touches of what the harp is doing, and there is some stuff happening in the cello, some harmony, I guess. So it's important as orchestrators to know where the climaxes are of the music and know how, we are going to get to those climaxes and get out of them. And hopefully that's written in the music, that there's a way of building up to the climax and coming out of it. And so as orchestrators, I think that it's our job to bring these things out even more if the composer will allow you to do your thing. And with James, the composer I work for, I had free rein. So the sort of climax here is on this page where there's a lot more motion with the harp and this flute trill, and this is actually when she accepts his proposal and they kiss and there's sort of butterflies and things sort of rising up. And so I am trying to downplay a little bit of the motion and excitement in this previous page of the orchestra, but also by having a little bit of subtle contrast from the previous section and showing a little bit of anticipation of what's going to come on this page. So how did I do that? Excuse me, if we start with the strings, nothing crazy, just divided the strings between the firsts and seconds. But what I chose to do here in the violas was to divide them. So 2 and 2 means not 2 desks, but 2 people on a note. And they're doing al punto, so at the point, and they're doing unmeasured tremolo. If I wanted to, I could have done sul pont to make it a little icier. But this is a touch of color, and it's building just a little bit of, it's blurring the line of the violin, and it's adding some motion. I was quite literal here with what was given with the cello. Because I don't need all the violi here with the seconds and the firsts, what I ended up doing was taking 4 violas and putting them with the top note of the cello. So I have more people on the top note and less on the bass. I introduce one player on a natural harmonic, which happens here with the cello. It's not really needed, but I'm extra. So let's have a quick look at the woodwinds and what I did. So this was in the flute, and you'll notice it's not in the flute on this page. Am I gonna get fired? And no, I didn't get fired, thankfully. So why isn't it in the flute? Well, it's not in the flute because on the next page we have a flute trill, and we have something here that's in the flute, and it actually does not stay in the flute. So I did not put it in the flute here. Let me back up to the sketch, because I wanted to save that color of the flute and make it more special when it comes in here. Things I've learned from Mozart is just saving your colors. Mozart didn't have a ton of colors available to him, just with some of the instruments that were available back in the day. So one way to make things seem more colorful and more special was to save instruments. So when their entrances, when they enter, it just feels more special. The other thing that I did was I took this gesture and I spread this around the woodwinds a little bit to just have a little more playfulness and have things sort of move so they're a little more liquid and not just one mass moving this way. And I thought that was a subtle way to introduce some excitement and sort of motion along with the violi. The harp continues just as it was before, same down here. I have a bass clarinet just sort of thickening the cello here. And I have one horn here with the fiber mute continuing from the first page, and they basically are doing the top note of what the cello has. In the harp, if you look here, I gave the second harp some harmonics that sound in unison with this. And something kind of interesting here, I guess is, a little bit of a formula. When you have things like piano or woodwinds or things that are very high, or I should say just above the staff with ledger lines, that might be a place where the music is suggesting to orchestrate that by adding a triangle or a crotale or just something that has brilliance. And what I chose to do, because these are different pitches, is I chose to sort of orchestrate that. I chose a triangle. And if you notice, I use a thin beater for this note. And as the pitch goes down a little bit, I use a medium triangle. So I'm sort of orchestrating the pitch by the size of the triangle, which I think is pretty cool. So that is it for this page, and this is the last page that I can show because we're already at 20 minutes. So let me see if I can quickly explain what's happening here. Right, so this was in the piccolo, and I chose to put this in the flute because the flute sort of, this G here and above is sort of its cash register, where it speaks really well, and I just thought it would project better in the flute rather than the piccolo, and I certainly don't need to use the double. So what else did I do here? So I guess we should start with the strings and just take a look at what we got. So we've got some string stuff. We have a harp gliss and some orc bells, and we've got a little bit of a melody here, and this flute trill. So in the strings, what I did was spread these around. I'm doing half tremolo, half non-trem, because I just want a little bit of motion here, not too much. Something really cool, I think, just to orchestrate the lightness, is there's a D and a G, and those are both available as natural harmonics in the cello, and that's exactly what I did. I used harmonics. I used a natural harmonic here. On the D pedal, I marked it sul tasto flautando, so it's even airier. And so now let me kind of talk about some things that the music suggested to me. So I thought this needed to be very expressive, and I thought that by putting this in the flute, well, one, you know, it's sort of two colors that are similar even though they're doing different techniques, and I just thought putting this in the oboe would be just the perfect color, and it was. So I put it in the oboe. You'll notice the duration is different. A lot of times we have to anticipate that the MIDI might not have been performed perfectly in, and so I know that this should start on beat 2 and not here. So this was a decision I made. And to sort of color the strings, I have a flute, non-vibrato, breathy, transparent, so it just blends better. And I also did clarinets, non-espressivo, subtone. So really, you know, clarinets and this flute, all it's doing is sort of, they're with the strings, and that's what their function is. The orc bells are here. It was quite literal. I asked for brass mallets. So things I added was a suspended cymbal with soft yarn mallets, just for a little more shimmer, because this moment is just magical, and so I wanted to orchestrate that. And I let's see, this key tree was delivered, so that's fine, but I did something cool that I never did before, and I just wanted to try it. So what I did was, I have two harps here, and they're sort of doing this feathered gliss, and I have one of them just playing ord, you know, where they're doing it with their fingers, so it's a softer sound. And then the second harp I asked to do with a pick or fingernails, which is another technique which gives it a more, you know, brittle, articulated sound. So I thought this was a fun way of having two planes of tone. I've never seen it done. I'm not saying I invented it, but I just thought it would be cool. And then I thought, you know, it could be fun too to like start a gliss off with the fingers and have a second harp, you know, come in halfway through a gesture with a pick or a fingernail. So I just sort of offer that up as a tip. So I think we're going to stop there because we're at 23 minutes and we're going to stop there. So I really hope this was helpful, and have a wonderful morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. And don't forget to love yourself and each other. And I'll check you in the next one. Thank you so much.